We want to bring into this conversation former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen, and MS Now business analyst, Ron Insana. Ambassador Cohen, thank you for joining State of Play. Have you ever seen the U.S.'s relationship with Canada drop to a point this low?
Well, I've never seen it. It was pretty low in 1812 when we had the War of 1812 and British and Canadian and French forces set the White House on fire. But I'm not sure it's been as bad since then.
So give us a sense, as you witness what's happening right now, why is this such a problem? Why is this such a risk to American consumers?
Well, I think those are different questions. It's a risk to American consumers. And by the way, it's a pleasure to be on the air with Ron as well, who's someone who I've listened to for many years and whose judgment on these matters I trust more than most of the people who are on television these days, jabbering about this question. But we should be worried about it because these tariffs, most of these tariffs, are going to be paid by American consumers and by American businesses. I'm not a tariff fan. And the reason I'm not a tariff fan is because it's a very blunt instrument. And they almost always end up being anti-consumer. And we're facing a time where there's tremendous sensitivity to affordability. And this tariff war is only exacerbating affordability issues. And that's why we should be worried about it. This is not a Canada issue.
No, you're right. This is not just a Canada issue. It's an American issue as well. Ron, to the point the ambassador is just making there, talk about this. It's broader than just these individual products. It affects a lot of lives and can affect entire communities. And ultimately, it trickles down through our economy. How concerned should we be about the impact on American consumers when affordability, despite the president previously calling it a hoax, remains Americans' top concern?
Well, we're talking about inflation more broadly speaking when we talk about affordability. So anytime you levy a series of tariffs, that just pushes up the costs of these consumer goods. Again, as the ambassador said, borne by both businesses and consumers. So the Federal Reserve presumably is fighting to get inflation back down. You have all these states that do a great deal of business with Canada. I believe we do somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 billion worth of two-way trade with Canada, $1.3 trillion when you include Mexico. And so when you start getting into these kind of tit-for-tat trade wars, the cost of these goods go up. The retaliation undertaken now by Canada will have an impact on those companies that export to Canada. You've already seen the boycott of American alcohol products, by the way. Those shelves of Kentucky-based whiskey and things like that are absolutely empty in Canada. So no one really wins in these trade wars, not consumers. And quite frankly, I think both strategically and tactically, when the president and others started referring to Canada as the 51st American state, that was the opening salvo in not just a trade war, but a relationship that's now deteriorating with our closest ally in the world. And so I think there are a variety of ways in which American consumers and businesses will be hurt by this, and equally so on the Canadian side of the border as well.
Ambassador Cohen, I want to pick up where Ron just brought us there. Vice President J.D. Vance said the following yesterday when speaking about Canada. Listen.
We have to remember, Canada is a state. Sorry, Freudian slip. That was actually an accident.
Today, the president is saying Canada is entitled and acting like a state. He says he could rename Lake Ontario to Lake America. What is President Trump's fundamental misunderstanding about this relationship, Ambassador?
Well, I don't like speaking for others. I certainly don't like speaking for an American president, but I think it's fair to say that President Trump has never appreciated the strength of the symbiotic relationship between Canada and the United States, the integration of supply chains, the interrelationship of automobile manufacturing, of those supply chains. One of my favorite statistics is that a typical American car or Canadian manufactured automobile actually effectively crosses the border 9 to 12 times during its manufacture, because both countries, both their workers, both their companies are so integrally involved in the manufacturing process. And I think President Trump, if I can try and interpret a little bit, is thinking about the U.S.-Canada trade relationship as if it's the U.S.-China trade relationship or the U.S.-EU trade relationship or the U.S.-Japan trade relationship, when in fact the close connections which strongly benefit U.S. manufacturers, U.S. jobs, and U.S. communities that exist in the U.S.-Canada relationship don't exist in these other cases. And I think that's the fundamental miss of his policy.
And what's striking about what you're saying, and I traveled with the president when he went to Davos last year, where the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, made a statement that I think a lot of the global community embraced, is now you see Canada not relying as much on the U.S. and looking to, of all countries, China for potential trade relations going forward. To your experience, Mr. Ambassador, what was your experience like working with the Canadians that the president now refers to in effect as an adversary?
Well, I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to, part of my answer may be a little bit surprising to you, but I do try and approach all of this with balance. So the real answer to the question is that during the time I was ambassador, and I think for decades before that, the United States had no closer and better friend, partner, or ally than Canada. Whether from a trade perspective, an intelligence sharing perspective, a defense perspective, or just our people-to-people ties. And that influenced the way in which we dealt with Canada. Because when you've got a real friend, a real historic close friend that is contributing mightily to the economic and the security well-being of the United States, you're prepared to provide plenty of slack. I will say, and this is where I could get in trouble, and it's a bad time to say it right now, and I don't want to overstate this, but the Canadians are very tough and can be very difficult negotiators. When I hear President Trump and his team criticize Canada and say how hard it is to do business with them, that has the ring of truth to it, because even a Joe Biden, who absolutely loved Prime Minister Trudeau and loved Canada, even a David Cohen, who fell in love with this country, there were times when it was very frustrating to be sitting across the negotiating table with Canada, which at times seemed to elevate its importance in the world order and its importance to the United States and made it very difficult to negotiate with them. The difference between then and now is it's okay to be difficult to negotiate with. We still negotiated. Canada still negotiated. And we got to a reasonable solution at the end of the day. And that is what needs to happen now. We need to take the personal taunts, the 51st state rhetoric, the name calling, the rhetorical insults. We need to take all that off the table. And I'll note that in the last couple of weeks, where progress seemed to be being made, it was when we had professional negotiators in the room quietly negotiating. USTR Greer, Minister LeBlanc, Chief Trade Negotiator Charette, these are professionals. And when they were quietly trying to work through these issues, not negotiating in the press, not calling each other names, we seem to be making progress. We need to return to that structure.
We will wait patiently, and hopefully we see a return to that structure. I imagine your negotiations were not the only challenging negotiations administrations have seen in the past, but we certainly appreciate your unique perspective and expertise on it, Ambassador David Cohen. We appreciate you, Ron Insana. Nice to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us here.
You too, Pete.